Welcome back to Cow Park Bros. In the second segment, we're going to be talking about something I've already coined pray or Pete. Jason is not exactly a fan of that as a potential topic for this episode, but I kind of like it. And I'm referencing a Sports Illustrated argument, or not argument, but an article. This is wild. Greg Bishop was the one that covered this, by the way. So apparently there's an issue with this high school coach, Joe Kennedy. He is bantering with a fellow assistant coach. He drops down on one knee and closes his eyes in prayer. And so what's wild is that this story came out in 2015. It's now 2022, which is kind of odd. And so apparently this has been going on for years until finally his employers said it was time to call it a day on basically kneeling and praying during these high school football games. Now, a big bone of contention for some folks is that, well, he's not mandating anything. He's not making it school policy, you got to pray. Now, I'm a little conflicted on that because he has a leadership role. He's the head football coach. There's almost some built-in pressure. There's some implied pressure that someone should go along with this. Judging by your facial expression, Jason, you might be skeptical of that. Why do you feel that that's not necessarily the case?
So I definitely understand what you're saying, that he's in a leadership position, and so he's in a position, somebody could say, of influence over the students, which in general, there's some truth to that. However, like you said, he's not mandating anything. He's not requiring anything. He's not telling people, hey, if you want to come join me, come join me. He said just the opposite. He's never asked, encouraged, or pushed, or requested, or suggested that anybody join him on the field to do that. That's why he's always out in the middle of the field by himself. It's real quick. And that's it. Now, I know people, like you said, when I say that, oh, he has that influence, and I think the article mentions a lot, the word a lot, coercion, that indirectly might coerce the kids to want to try to pray with them. And because it's happening on district property, school district property, that's why the district had to step in and say, hey, we need you to stop doing that. Now, we'll say they also did provide him options of alternatives to pray out of sight, away from everybody, like in a broom closet or something like, or janitor's closet, in the press box, which, by the way, the press box actually has windows. People can see him in there doing it. So, but yeah, when it comes to just what the question you asked me, why I feel like that's him being a head coach isn't a big deal, because yes, he has that influence, but I also think that gives people the mindset that these kids are weak-minded. This is 2022. I think you and I both know that in general, kids aren't that easily inspired or coerced to do anything they don't want to do.
I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, and I'm not trying to be contrarian in that regard.
If you are, that's fine.
It's just that I have a unique perspective,
Of course.
I do have children, and they happen to be minors. And so even in the face of, oh, well, my kid isn't that impressionable or weak-minded, the reality is they are still minors, and they haven't been through the rigor of being in those scenarios and dealing with stuff like that. So I would argue that because of his role and his access to these young students, it's even more imperative that he be more cognizant of how impressionable they are.
Can it be said that he's already doing that, which is why he does it in the middle of the field away from his team?
I feel like once it got to like the interviews and shit, it was no longer about how discreet this is. I'm not trying to say that that's how he thought it was going to turn out in the first place. I don't think that was intentional. I think at this point it's turned into a damn circus, and he doesn't have the good sense to just walk away and close up shop of the circus.
Well, okay. Now again, the article mentions he acknowledges that obviously when it got to the point of the first part of that, or first sentence in this article from Sports Illustrated mentions that night back in 2015 on October, 7 years ago, he went out to the field to pray, and when he, again, real quick, when he came up, he realized there was a whole crowd around him, including cameras, fans, players from the opposing team, politicians apparently as well. So at that point, yeah, he recognized that obviously become, as you put it, a circus. I think he might have used a similar word. But when it originated 8 years prior to this, in 2015, so 2007, that's what it's talking about. It probably didn't really become a circus until the school told me he couldn't do it anymore. And no, I'm not trying to blame the school when it comes to them causing it to be a circus. But I imagine by 2015, it became news, whether it be him posting things on social media, the district saying something about it, whatever it may be. And obviously now, 7 years later, it's finally gotten to the Supreme Court, and it's getting even more attention. Now, I don't know if he's still doing that on the field. My presumption is he probably isn't, because I'm sure that would have resulted in him getting fired potentially. Potentially, we don't know. School district may be smarter than that. But that's what this whole argument's about. Why I got to the Supreme Court. The First Amendment, freedom of religion, but also the whole separation of church and state. Who's going to win that war? And that's really what this is all about. It really is. I know the opposing attorney in the article mentions that she feels like normally it will be a slam dunk case in the opposition's favor. But because he has become such a beacon, we'll say, for lack of a better word, of this side of freedom of religion side of things, he feels like that he's probably going to win the case most likely because of that. But that's really what it's about: the whole separation of church and state versus freedom of religion.
Yeah, it's interesting perspective, and I appreciate you sharing the bit about the lawyer. Yeah, I'm big on freedom of religion. I'm not big on freedom of fucking around and not finding out.
What do you mean?
That means you can't use your religion or your gender, basically, or anything else about you. You're as a bully pulpit to basically try and hit me over the head with a mallet about how that you can just do whatever you want and say whatever you want. I mean, I get the whole religious freedom deal. Interestingly enough, when this guy was talking about, and when you were espousing your feelings about religious freedom, I immediately thought about sports figures that have kind of had, I mean, it was not a religious freedom thing. It was, I'm just not going to stand for the anthem. and then it got twisted into something else, Kaepernick. And then I also thought about Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf. I mean, he got fucking blackballed basically for not coming out for the national anthem. So
I thought he actually came out for the anthem, but just turned his back to the flag or something like that.
There were a few incidents where at one point he was doing that. At one point he wasn't coming out at all. Yeah, it was crazy.
Yeah, apparently even I remember Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, fellow Muslim, was even apparently tried to talk to Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf, formerly Chris Jackson, to say, hey, I understand why you're doing this. You feel like the flag represents tyranny, but here is maybe how you could look at it differently, or whatever it may be. I remember that specifically, and I used to be a big fan of Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf back then. So
this was I love this game. Plus, dealing with Tourette syndrome, he's killing it. Big LSU cat. Yeah, great product. But yeah, I immediately think, hell, we could even brought up Tim Tebow.
See, well, so obviously the act, yeah. So that's probably the most relative to this situation in a way, because the act is the same not even on the field per se, but in a football arena, kneeling in prayer. Now, obviously the big difference is Tim Tebow, at least when it comes to the NFL, wasn't doing it on a school setting. And that's part of what the problem is, because of he's doing it at school. And as you say, with the students around who can be coerced into praying with him, God forbid. But if you're a big proponent of church and state separation, then there you go. But even with that, and I understand the whole point about him being an influence. If I'm not in any way whatsoever encouraging you or coercing you to do this, then I'm not, the state in this case, trying to make you, bring the church into it. Now, if you join me, that's on you. Whether you're influenced by my me being a coach or not. But I have to imagine if any players or anybody else, as example of that night I mentioned in 2015, wanted to join him in prayer, it's probably because they wanted to do it, not because he coerced them into doing it. But again, because they're minors, that automatically means they can't think for themselves. So,
right. There's also the same reason why, 17, 18-year-old boys, men, barely adult, say, no, I'm okay with being hazed. I'm okay with that. Just because you say it's okay doesn't make it okay.
You say being hazed?
Hazed, yes. Yes,
okay.
I'm making the connection. I'm making the correlation to a hazing incident, potentially. And I know, and I'm not inferring that this guy is hazing people. But what I am saying is that 17-year-old, 18-year-old, 13-year-old, 10-year-old children, even if you are adult, technically, you are still incredibly impressionable. And this guy should know that. And, I think another interesting thing is this guy wasn't even all that religious. Like, what changed in his life that he decided to turn up and go full Austin on this?
Well, see, that's okay. So that's a stretch. See, because the article does mention that he might have had some type of change in life, that he's not religious, and he even says he's still not religious. But just because he prays on the field doesn't make him Joel Osteen, and I'm sure he would probably separate himself from that as well. No offense to Colin Kaepernick, but just because he's kneeling on the field doesn't make him Angela Davis. So again, no offense to Kaepernick, but just saying. So,
yeah.
But yeah, and I do want to say not one last thing, but say one thing here. I know you say that that minors are impressionable, and you made the range from like 10 to 17, 18-year-olds. That's a huge difference in that impressionability between 10-year-olds and 18 to 17-year-olds. I think you'll acknowledge that as well. Now granted, not every 17, 18-year-old is equal when it comes to that. I get that. But when we're framing it just when it comes to the players on his team, even if they were 14, huge difference in teenagers as opposed to somebody who's 10. So let's just kind of keep that in the frame of teenagers when it comes to this, and when it comes to how easily they can be coerced into praying on the field, which is the worst thing in the world, right? Sarcasm.
Yeah,
I'm not saying you're saying that, but I'm just saying.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. My thing is, fam, good luck. And worst case scenario, there's always FUBU. Oh, man. All right. That concludes our segment on Pray or Pete. Coming up next, we're covering the nationalist riot in Idaho that wasn't on Cowbar Pros.